and welcome to Freda TV, the place to break free from narcissistic abuse with quantum tools and understandings. And today's Freda TV episode is part 2 of Can Anybody Be Hooked by a Narcissist? And it was wonderful to see that a lot of people resonated with last week's episode, which was really awesome. And I'm pretty excited about this week's episode because we're going to dive deeply into specific examples in regard to people who can be hooked and people who can't be hooked. And first off, I want to start off with a lovely metaphor, a part of a book that I dearly love, and the book is Mastery to Love, and it's by Miguel Ruiz, I'm not quite sure how to say his last name, R-U-I-Z, and it's a book that's really worth looking up because it's a pretty incredible book. And there's a part in this book which lots of people have quoted, but if you haven't heard it, it's really interesting. And how it goes is like this. There was a person at home and their kitchen was bare and they weren't cooking themselves any meals and they hadn't stocked their pantry and they were really, really hungry. And there was a knock on the door and there was this seedy looking guy holding a greasy pizza. And they could smell the pizza and it was driving them crazy because they were just so starving. And they said that this guy said to them, "You can have this pizza. In fact, I can come every day and bring you pizza, but there's just one condition with that. And that is I can treat you however I want to. I'll be able to control you if you eat this pizza." And because this person was starving hungry, they took the pizza. And every day pizza would arrive and they'd get their pizza. But the terrible price of it was that they were being abused and controlled, but they still kept taking that deal every single day. And then in the story, there's another person who has stocked their kitchen beautifully and they cook for themselves and they are totally capable of providing themselves with nutritious, incredible, flavoursome meals. And this same seedy guy knocks on the door with his greasy pizza and they open the door, hear about the deal and laugh and shut the door and easily refuse it. And we might have questioned or are still questioning ourselves in narcissistic abuse. Why on earth are we accepting the crumbs regardless of the horrible abuse that we're going through? Why are we doing it? And the reason is because if we're empty and if we haven't stepped up to the plate to supply ourselves with love, approval, survival and security, we're going to be starving. And when we're starving, we're really desperate and we're really needy. And we're going to make choices and hang on to people that hurt us and abuse us until we let go and we start becoming that healthy, solid adult source to ourselves. And if we don't do that, even though these people are abusing us and hurting us horrendously, if they do let go, even though the abuse has stopped, we might feel like we're going to die. And so many of us went through those situations with narcissistic abuse, 100%. So I want to get into specific examples and I'm just going to check in with what I've got here because they're good examples. And the first one is to do with George and Jean. Now, George gets really triggered when people disagree with him. And what happens is if he's having an opinion and somebody doesn't agree with him, he gets really anxious, very, very fearful. And he'll try to convince people of his opinion. And then if that doesn't work, what happens is he will start pleasing this person. He'll try and do everything to make them happy. And this is George's normal. He doesn't even realize that he's doing this because he's been doing this since he was a very, very young child. And what this is all about is that this terror that he's going to be abandoned or rejected if people don't agree with him or even punished, or that he'll be deserted completely. Hence why he clings on and he tries to make it all better. And George, in a relationship with a narcissist called Anne, who regularly disagrees with his opinions and puts him down and tells him he's got no idea. And George hooks in and he fights with her and he tries to get her to agree with him and see it his way. And when that doesn't happen, and when she threatens him with abandonment or pulls away from him, he chases after her, trying to please her and win her back and do everything he can to keep her in his life. And all of this is unconscious. And why is George doing this stuff? Why is he doing it? The reason is because he was never validated as a child. He was pushed aside. He was made to believe that he was invalid, that he was unimportant. He was dismissed, criticized, and rejected. His inner being never developed into a solid inner self. And he was never able to self-soothe or to be with himself in healthy ways when other people didn't agree with him. His entire inner identity is precariously poised on needing other people to validate him and get him. And this is a dire formula for being trapped in being hooked onto narcissists, is to continually try to get people to validate you who never have had the resources to do it, because you're actually replaying your childhood wounds of never being validated. So let's now have a look at Jean. And Jean used to be hooked into narcissistic relationships for exactly the same reasons. And Jean did what George used to do. She used to try to convince and make people see it her way, was panicked when they didn't, and then would go into overdrive people pleasing so that they wouldn't leave her. But Jean woke up from her trance. She realized the pattern that was playing out painfully in her life. She wanted to get to the bottom of it. So she stopped trying to force everybody else to change, and she came inside her own body, tracked her wounds back to origin, found her childhood wounds, was able to load them up, release them, and reprogram them with Source True Self Healing, which is what quantum tools do, which is what quantum freedom healing does, which is what the NARP program does. And as a result of that, Jean was able to up level into being a solid sense of self, no longer precariously poised on needing other people to get her or agree with her. So what that grants is incredible freedom, emotional freedom, just to be yourself. And also too, to allow other people to have their opinions, to be able to have relationships with people that don't agree with you, and know that your love and your connection is never even reliant on that. That doesn't matter. But also too, that when she was coming across people who had values and ways of being that just were not her value system, were not okay for her reality, that she could walk away, leave these people alone, and no longer have any urge to rewrite her painful childhood scripts. Really, really easy. So that completely changed her world and her life. So let's have a look at the next example, which is Karen and Craig. And Karen came from an abusive family. She had a terrible family of origin. She was in a family with a lot of narcissistic abuse. She still resented what had happened in her childhood. She'd positioned herself as a victim of childhood abuse. She was heavily connected in abuse forums in regard to that. And as an adult in her 30s, she met this charming guy called James, and they formed a relationship, and she really thought that, you know, this was wonderful. This was a man loving her really healthily. And she was so dismayed to discover that James started being really selfish. It became quite obvious that he couldn't care less about her well-being. It was actually all about him. He became very abusive, very angry, And Karen was incensed. She was hugely, hugely triggered about all of this. And she made it her personal business to lecture him, prescribe to him, tell him how awful he was, point out to him all the things that he was doing that were not healthy and not great for the relationship, etc. And Karen stayed in a relationship with him, fruitlessly trying to force him to change, righteously telling all of her friends and anybody who'd listen how horrible he was to her and other people, and how horrible that there are people in the world like her original family who are selfish, who don't care about other people, etc., etc., etc. And she hung on to James all the way until he discarded her. And then, of course, he fulfilled all of her beliefs about how horrible people are. And she was even more traumatized than what she had been from her family of origin. And then we have Craig, and Craig had been in relationships with one woman after the other, who was all about herself, who was emotionally incredibly unavailable to him, who would simply use him up for his resources, spit him out, and eventually abandon him. And in those relationships, Craig used to hang on. He would argue with them, try to get them to be available and do the right thing and have integrity and stop lying and stop having affairs, all of those sorts of things. And Craig also woke up out of the trance, and he realized profoundly that what was happening here was he was replaying a pattern that had been established with his mother many, many decades ago, where his mother was terminally unavailable. Everything else in his mother's, the socialite's life, was more important than Craig. Her parties, her clothes, getting her hair done, her affairs with men, all sorts of things. And when Craig realized all of this and he sorted out his original wounds, he went to them in his body, he addressed them with quantum tools, he released the traumas, he up-leveled and brought in his true self-function. What happened was he was an up-leveled self. And then he got into a relationship with Jane. And the warning signs happened. The pattern reappeared. Jane started doing all of that stuff that had always been Craig's pattern. So Craig confronted Jane, and he was very clear, very direct, very in his rights. And he stated what he needed, he called it, he asked for how it would need to be for him to continue. She did not rise to meet him at that level of authenticity and relationship connection. So he said goodbye. And when he said goodbye, he was punching the air with excitement. He was so proud of himself and he felt freed. He knew he dodged a bullet. And he was like, wow, I just showed up completely differently than I've ever showed up before. So 2 weeks after that, Craig meets Annette. And Annette's really sweet. She's gorgeous. And they're now in a solid relationship where Annette adores him and is totally, incredibly committed and available. The pattern was broken. So let's have a look at our final example, which is Frank and Freda. And Frank is easily guilted. He's guilted in relationships all the time. And when he has relationships with women, what happens is they're usually angry and they're never happy and they're always blaming. And what he was always doing was trying to do more and thinking, oh my gosh, that was my fault. He was taking way too much responsibility and feeling like there must be a way that I can fix this. There must be a way that I can make her happy. And these relationships were just continuing on for him, and then what would happen was these people would eventually abandon him, leave him, and his story was, I do all of this for women and they just don't appreciate it and they leave me, and that was his pattern over and over again. And the reason is because he had a mother that had lots of illnesses, and she was a perpetual victim. She was always complaining. She scapegoated Frank. She made him responsible for how she felt, and he was always running around trying to make her happy so that he could have a mother that was functional enough to love him and caretake him. So that was his story. Freda used to play out the same stuff. She'd get into relationships and easily get blamed and scapegoated. She used to take all the responsibility, take on far too much. Freda realized these patterns in her life that she was playing out with narcissists, and she became determined to heal these patterns. So she went into her inner being and she found all of the wounds that she'd had from her family of origin, which was, it must be my fault. If I can just fix these people, then they're going to be healthy enough to love me. And she'd been playing that out with abusers ever since. And then what happened was she up-leveled. She became very solid on the inside about, I take responsibility for me. I allow other people to take responsibility for their stuff, but it's not mine. And she got into a relationship with a gentleman, and he started getting really critical. He started blaming. She pulled back. She looked after her own self rather than feeling like she had to jump in there and fix it. And she stated to him, this is my line. This is your stuff. This is not mine. I'm taking responsibility for me. You take responsibility for you. So he unraveled, got very angry, started yelling, launched into this lecture on what partners should do for each other, and it's really selfish and wrong to not help somebody out with their emotions. And she recognized it felt really unwholesome and controlling in her body, so she broke off the relationship with this guy. And he was like, yeah, whatever, you know, playing the tough guy. And then a week later, he was round on her doorstep with flowers, begging, crying, you know, trying to do anything to win her back. She's like, no, I'm sorry. I'm really not interested. And he wanted a conversation. And she said to him, there's two things I've really realized is that I want somebody that is positive and happy and somebody who takes responsibility for their own emotional stuff. And he looked at her like an alien and started twisting and turning again. And she's like, thank you. Thank you for confirming to me that I've made incredibly the right decision. And she walked forward into life, happy as graduation reached, knowing that I have just in real time passed the test. I've shown up completely differently. I didn't go down the same path that I used to go, which means that a whole new life trajectory has opened up to me now. I now am more aligned with my truth, more aligned with my true self, and I am in my body generating it. That's where our power is. And this is where I find it incredible that narcissistic abuse forums and narcissistic abuse experts are having you focus exclusively on the narcissist. How is that going to help? I used to do it. I know what it's about. I used to do it, and it nearly took me to my death. And this is why in the Thrive Away we turn all of that around 180 degrees and we stop researching them. We stop trying to find out everything about narcissists. This has got nothing to do with narcissists. they are only reflecting back to us what we need to heal and up level to get onto a different trajectory that has nothing to do with painful relationships. And if we keep focused on them, we keep separated from the ability to transcend, to get an amazing, incredible real life, which is what we should all be going for. It's what we all want. So I love this stuff. I love what it does, and I love how powerfully it does. And when I get to work with, and I could go into 100 more examples, I really could, because over the nearly last 10 years, I've seen them all, I've worked with them all, I've experienced a ton of them myself. I know the difference when we up level. I know how quickly our life changes and how powerfully when we up level, and that's my passion in helping people do that. So I would love you to join me and join in with this community, with the people that are actively doing the work in their bodies. And you can connect up to my free resources and my free webinar groups by clicking on the link that appears on this video. So I really would love you. I love how a lot of people are getting behind this Thriver mission, and you're spreading these videos, you're sharing them, and you're subscribing, and you're liking, you're doing all the right things, because I think it's so important to understand that as a collective, we can help save lives, we can help pull people out of that victimized, stuck trajectory and get them into true healing, help them see the truth. That's what these videos and my work is all about. So you know the drill. Keep smiling, keep healing, keep thriving, because there's nothing else to do. Lots of love. Bye-bye.